Hello and welcome to Sacred Psychology, the podcast for misfits and mystics. Here, neuroscience and spirituality go hand in hand. Join me, Tamara Powell, on a no-holds-barred adventure outside the box, because that's where all the truly great shit happens anyway. Welcome back to Sacred Psychology. I'm your host, Tamara Powell. This month, I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm joining with podcasters across the globe to spread the podcast love and share some of our favorite podcasts. One I would love to introduce you to is The Addicted Mind with Dwayne Osterlin. Addiction is something Dwayne understands both personally from having entered an inpatient rehab for depression and alcohol and drug abuse at just 17. And now also as a licensed therapist. So what I especially love about his podcast is really getting that joint approach. He interviews lots of other great minds in the addictions and recovery and psychological communities. And then you also get that very personal touch with him. So you can listen to episodes of The Addicted Mind and follow the show at theaddictedmind.com or, of course, on the podcast player of your choice. All right, on with today's show. My guest today is Gina Senarighi of Uncommon Love. She's someone I've been following for quite some time now in multiple social circles. You see, she's always stood out among the noise online because of her incredibly valuable content for everyone. Seriously, guys, I mean everyone, individuals, couples, and fellow clinicians serving these populations. Not only was I intrigued by her working with, obviously, the uncommon, the non-traditional, the taboo in many circles, but also because all of her stuff was spot on, and she gives away so much valuable content, downloads, resources, you name it. So I will definitely have some links to some of her work in the show notes. You should go check it out. But who is she really? Well, Gina is a couples counselor. She's a communication consultant and author who has been helping loving couples transform their relationships for nearly 20 years at retreats, workshops, and in consultations. Her non-judgmental, straight talk approach, generous expertise, and warmth puts clients at ease to get real when facing infidelity, jealousy, and non-monogamy. She supports clients online and on retreat as they reconnect with passion and authenticity. Gina lives in Portland, Oregon with her partner, their baby, and her little dog, Frida. Guys, this is a power-packed episode. For those of you who are like, hell no, there's no way I would ever be in a polyamorous arrangement, that's totally okay. You need this episode too. We dive into a lot of the shit that totally sets couples up for failure and how to get around it. So whether you are completely monogamous or wide open and free, this episode is for you. So without further ado, I give you my conversation with Gina Senarighi. Hey, Gina.
Hi.
Welcome to the show, girlfriend.
Thanks. I'm really excited to get to talk to you today.
I am super excited about this too. You have seriously built quite the following with a really, what most people would think is a taboo niching.
Yeah, it's a pretty specific focus, that's for sure.
And I love the name of your website, your focus for that, Uncommon Love.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it started for me way back when I was in marriage and therapy school to be a therapist, and I really actually wanted to focus on LGBTQ relationships. And the agency I did my internship at really just focused all their work there, and nobody else in intern land wanted to work with couples. And so I got to do a lot of work with couples.
Yes.
And at the same time in my own personal life, I met someone and fell in love with someone who was in a non-monogamous relationship. And so, while I was in school, like so many of us do,
right,
I was also trying to study my own stuff.
Totally.
Right? And there wasn't anything out there. And so I ended up kind of doing like my master's studies sort of thesis on applying couples theory to non-monogamous, consensually non-monogamous folks. And, because it was both a personal and a professional passion, right? But I wanted to name my practice something that could encompass all the things way back then. And it's still a little bit of all the things. It's funny how even within now, I've really focused much more on the non-monogamy piece. Mm-hmm. And yet within that, I find a lot of folks come to me for a lot of things that might not quite fit so clearly in there. Like I have a lot of folks who are sex workers professionally mm-hmm. who come to me, not because they're in non-monogamous relationships necessarily, but because they have an assumption that I won't judge.
Right. And it's a good assumption.
yeah, I would say that is pretty fair. Or I've had folks meet like in some bi arrangement type sites. Mm-hmm. And they, again, same kind of thing. Like they want to work with me because they're not worried about judgment. And then I have a lot of folks come to me to work through affairs because they, can see that there's these transferable knowledge areas, right, about insecurity and jealousy
Definitely.
And trust building and trust breaking that really applies, even though that's infidelity isn't really part of consensual non-monogamy, but it applies. So anyway, in Uncommon Love, I've ended up serving a much wider range of people over these last 10 to 15 years.
I am so excited. You are seriously my soul sister from another mister. That is definitely my practice down here in the Bible Belt.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't have the super cool name Uncommon Love, but I named my practice Aria because it means anything but ordinary. Mm-hmm. So yes. When it comes to, it's funny because as we talk about this conversation, what most people are like, oh, it's so taboo. At the same time, it is what makes all relationships great. Some of these topics that, how can you have any relationship without talking about jealousy or insecurity or great sex or all the things.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And trust.
Yeah. Trust. So key.
Yeah. And we were talking just a little bit ago, mm-hmm. I gave a talk recently and was kind of going to focus on non-monogamy, but ultimately I find that making that bridge for folks that mm-hmm. Non-monogamy isn't really all that weird or out there. No. And if more folks not so much talked about non-monogamy, but got more specific in talking about their boundaries and expectations in monogamy, it really could help so many more people avoid miscommunication and misunderstanding and like really intense hurt that comes out of not knowing. When I say we're monogamous, I mean, not all, like typically folks mean we'll only have penis and vagina sex just with each other. But that also for a lot of folks means things like I won't go on the dance floor with someone else who's attractive to me, or I won't flirt with a barista who I think is really cute, mm-hmm. or I'll let you know if a coworker starts messaging me privately, or I won't get naked at a spa with other people, right? I wouldn't get naked around anyone other than you. Or I won't even, one of my couples had some real tension come up because they had a contractor working on their house, and this person was alone in a bedroom with someone of the opposite gender. And that brought up a lot of insecurity and intense feelings for someone else because they'd never talked about all these other pieces that feel like they either threaten or bring into question forms of intimacy with other people. And so anyway, none of those folks were going to have sex with anyone else, but they also had never talked about any of those other pieces. And my hope is by kind of like normalizing just the conversation about non-monogamy, maybe less of that misunderstanding will happen for people.
Yeah, shit. If you can have that conversation, then a normal one about who you're talking to should be much easier, people.
Totally. Well, and so often, so much is wrapped up in, we really, really like this fantasy idea that like, you complete me, you're my one and only. I could meet all of your emotional, friendship, and sexual needs forever.
Pressure of that. Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful fantasy, but it's just not real. And like you said, so much pressure that, we need to have friendships with other people. I would say robust friendships, so emotional intimacy with other people in order to be healthy human beings and to have healthy relationships.
Right. So I love that in that talk, you called it the short-sightedness and overemphasis of polarity.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
true.
when we just focus on the sex piece, right? Like it really minimizes the kind of functional intimacy that comes with building a life with someone, right? Like I know I can trust my partner's paycheck is showing up. I can trust, you can trust that I'm going to do the dishes when I say I'll do the dishes. We know that who's going to take the dog to the vet, or all of these pieces that are teeny tiny, but they're building trust every single day. And it minimizes that whole piece, let alone like the vision of our future and the rocking chairs on the front porch, right?
Yes,
or
so
all
true.
the friendship we've built. Or then the other part, I think so much of our talk about sex doesn't talk about pleasure. And I think about the ways that we savor food or music or dancing with other people sometimes feels really intimate. And it's so important, right?
So intimate.
Me and my girlfriends going and having a hot tub night where we have a little wine and we tell some secrets and we all talk all night and eat really good chocolate is so important to my well-being. And that's intimacy. And we're not sleeping together. It's not necessarily monogamy.
Right.
But if we don't talk about those things as though they're really valuable, we're also missing this like whole complex web that we have around us that's so important.
Yes. And so you say, and I totally agree, that default monogamy sets couples up for failure.
Yeah. I mean, most of the defaults do, right? Like when
all these assumptions. Hello.
Yeah. If I run on assumption, I mean, even in the example, you and I, right? Like we barely know each other, but I could run on some assumptions about like how you run your practice or what you're doing in the world. And I may or may not be accurate, right? And so if I actually want to get to know you on a human to human level, I have to get specific and get curious about you. And I think you've probably seen this, like the longer we're in relationship with people, the more lazy we get about that.
Totally.
And so we're less likely to keep those intimate bonds growing.
And then we get resentful that our partners aren't staying curious about us, even though we've gotten lackadaisical with
Totally. And we default to these roles that are super unsexy.
So gross.
Right? Like you're just like mom and wife or, there's so many of them that are not particularly, I mean, some folks are into them and that's great as far as role play. That's a different thing.
That's making it a fantasy, total difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a difference between your role and your soul, as I like to say. So.
Yeah, and so much of the default and the role stuff then ends up getting laced with should and shame and expectation and like obligation. And it's not the same kind of like freedom that comes from having a conversation. Even just, I do with a lot of my clients, we do like an annual checkup for their relationship. We look over like, what are the strengths?
Brilliant.
What are the things that have been real shared successes? What are the things you want more of next year? What do you want to shift and change? Because when we get into that default setting, often, like you're saying, resentments can build in those spaces and we never talk about them. I had a couple once the female partner had been buying all their groceries. They've been together like 40 years. And she'd been buying wintergreen toothpaste like probably as long as I've been alive. And because she thought he liked wintergreen toothpaste and she hated it, but she kept buying it. Somewhere along the way, she thought that. And it came out in a session, he had been buying his own secret stash of toothpaste because he also hated the wintergreen, right? Like, and it's such a tiny little micro example.
Oh, it's perfect.
We missed something, but he hated it and she hated it, but they never talked about it. Like just something as silly as toothpaste, but you use toothpaste every day, right? It's an everyday reminder of like, God, why do they make me get the wintergreen or whatever?
I had a couple do the same thing, but with coffee. He had been bringing her coffee every day and she hated coffee. She wanted tea.
Yeah.
And he totally would have brought her tea. He was so sweet, but this whole, they don't talk about it. So I love that you are raising awareness for monogamous and consensual non-monogamous partners alike, not monogamish couples that, hey, do not run on automatic assumptions or default, because that definitely sets you up for failure. Ask these questions.
Yeah.
And you have a brilliant resource that I'm going to tag in the show notes. That you recently, yes, girl, so good, of the 100 questions.
Oh, yeah.
For non-monogamous couples, but really they're for all couples, in my opinion.
Yeah.
They really do transcend.
Yeah. I mean, I think like you like we were saying, it's not just the folks who end up choosing non-monogamy who need to have these conversations. If we're going to grow and evolve as individuals, and our partners are going to grow and evolve, then we have to have ways to check in along the way. And so sometimes, because it's easy to get lazy about that, or to just kind of not even realize how we're not staying curious, I find that having these kind of lists of questions can be really helpful. We were talking about listservs earlier. I'm this year going to send out a monthly list of just like check-in questions for folks.
Good. Please do.
To help with that tune-up stuff, right? And stay curious and interested. I mean, who doesn't want to stay intrigued or fascinated or potentially surprised by their partner?
Swoon.
That's what keeps the magic alive. Yeah.
And you have a real gift. I don't mind totally validating this for you either, in coming up with creative questions and grouping them, things that, I think of in session, but even if I'm honest, I don't always think to come home and ask. Just brilliant.
A few years ago, I made this commitment. My partner, thank goodness, is really into personal work and relationship development. But I thought it's hypocritical for me to expect my clients to try these exercises and activities and worksheets and things and not have done them myself. And so I'm really good at creating all these little tools, but a couple of years ago said to my partner, hey, turns out if I'm going to ask other people to do this, I should be doing these things too. And so it's actually been really fun for us. Partially, it's just a good quality control check for me to see, are there typos or are there things that are not as interesting as I think they are when I'm writing them. And then sometimes it's just mostly overall been really great for us to stay engaged with each other and to have kind of a playful way to keep working through this stuff.
Yes, playful. It doesn't always have to feel like work. And you don't have to break out the list and make it Aqua Taco, but just, maybe tuck one in your, purse for date night, or collect a jar of them and just randomly pull in once in a while.
Yeah. And I have some folks I have a lot of folks who either travel for work or they're far apart for large parts of the week or parts of the month, and they will text them to each other or email parts of them back and forth so that they're kind of like tending to them, not just in the 10 minutes they have together before they go to bed at night, or in the 20 minutes when they're rushing around in the morning before they leave. Right.
Timing people.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard in modern life for couples to find time together where you're energetically present, and you have the physical energy to be there for your sweetie when you've got kids and dogs and a mortgage and family members who need caretaking and all the other responsibilities of life. So we found a lot of ways to kind of get creative about still reaching out to your sweetie. That stuff typically comes naturally when you first meet, right? Like, I want to text you all these. Yeah. And I want to show you that you're special to me. But over time, we stop putting that much energy in. And so often having little reminders or little tools to help interrupt and get back on that bandwagon of creating momentum together.
Yes. It really does build emotional intimacy, and which then leads to great sexual intimacy time and time again. But I want to come back around to that idea of how that emotional intimacy really dovetails with trust. And so one of my favorite sections of your list is on the emotional intimacy, or in my opinion, like the privacy secrets questions. And especially couples who No. Yeah, who assume that their relationship's doing really, really well. I'm going to challenge you right now to pull out Gina's list and go through the questions on privacy and confidentiality and don't see if you don't have a gut clench for a hot second. So good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's just another area where we don't get very clear, and it's really easy to overstep because I'm running with assumptions from my family or from my history with roommates or something about what appropriate boundaries are in sharing spaces or building a life. And so I might like run on my cultural norms, and you might have a whole different set of expectations or norms that you're working from. And then, within that, it also, this I think really goes to talking about like building those friendships with other people. I talk so often to couples, who come to me because they're looking at non-monogamy. And then when we really break it down, ultimately they may or may not be all that interested. They're usually not all that interested in actually having sex with other people, although it's fascinating and it's fun to fantasize about. They really just are like kind of lonely together because they've become each other's only friend. Yes. And neither of them's going out, to have a beer with their friends or joining a club or, going on with a hiking group or nothing, right? They just go to work and then sit in front of Netflix together. Oh. And it's no wonder they're kind of bored and not feeling all that sexy together. And so it often seems like maybe adding other people will change that up. And it certainly would change it up.
For a second.
Yeah, but it does. Yeah, it's not a long-term solution.
No, it's like taking aspirin for brain cancer. You got a headache because there's a tumor. Like I can give you aspirin and you're going to feel better for a hot second. But if you don't, really deal with those bigger themes of like you're talking about of emotional intimacy and friendships and adventure and trust and passion, adding in more players is not the final answer.
Yeah, I mean, for most folks, adding in more variables and more emotions from more people only further complicates and amplifies any issues that are already there. So one of the things I usually do is focus on kind of having a tune-up, especially around conflict and negotiation skills. Not that non-monogamy has to be full of conflict, but it's part of we're going to have different needs that meet up, right? Like you want to see someone who can only meet with you on Wednesday, and we were trying to line our nights up, and I want to see someone who can only meet on Thursday, and now one or both of us is bummed out. We're going to miss each other 2 nights this week.
Nights, yep.
Yeah. And so, we need to be able to talk about that without it bringing up all kinds of other power struggles we've had for the last 20 years together. Right? Or without me avoiding the conflict altogether without ever checking in with you and then feeling resentful about it, or all kinds of things that might be part of old patterns that we have. So we can take a little bit of time to focus on tuning some of those skills up. Often folks can move into non-monogamy without serious complications. And I'm really glad to see I have so many folks coming to me now really early on in the conversation about opening up their relationship because they want to be really intentional.
I love
about doing it. Yeah. And with intention, I mean, it can go really well. Most folks don't ever hear that, but it can go really well. It's without real intention and clarity and some pacing that I see folks get kind of carried away with the energy of it and lose themselves and lose each other.
Right. Most definitely. I think polyamory for the couples who are conscious with it and mindful and respectful, it's some of the best relationships that they've ever had. It's truly a marvel to watch when everything just ebbs and flows and beautiful synchronicity. But it is about having these conversations ahead of time. And as you were talking about the example of couples who, one may want to go out one night and the other's secondary partner can only go out on the other night. I was also thinking about couples who get into poly for differing reasons. One partner is getting into it because perhaps they want more of something and they want to try something new out sexually. And then the other one is more looking for the emotional intimacy. And it's been fascinating to have those same types of conversations about we can't just run on automatic assumption, and it really highlighting some of those power struggles and having to deal with the I'm not enough sort of thing.
Yeah, well, and I find that folks in general, I find there are really two core motivators that seem to show up. One is that there's like some specific either fantasy or sexual identity that can't get expressed in the original couple, right? Like, turns out I'm bi,
Right.
and or turns out I'm gay, but I want to stay with you,
Right.
or turns out I have this fetish about playing Scrabble, and you really hate spelling and everything to do with Scrabble, right? Like,
Right.
so we've decided that I'm going to get that either identity need met or like fantasy or fetish need met with other people. So like something really specific, kind of almost goal oriented. And then sometimes the other main theme I see is that it's really philosophical for a lot of people. They're like, I philosophically,
Right.
I see that there's got to be more love than just the love I share with this person in the world, and more complex relationships exist and matter to me, but I don't have a model to work from, and I'm trying to undo all this like cultural story about what is appropriate or right to do in relationship, and I need help sifting through all of that. So that's generally the two main themes. There's lots of variation on those themes, right? And then I think what you're saying about there's lots of folks who come at this with the idea that they're going to get some emotional connection involved. And there's just as many folks who are purely sexual and not so romantic or emotional in their motivation. And neither one is right or wrong, but it's really easy for partners to get caught up in comparing and judging which route is the appropriate route.
Thank you. That's exactly where I wanted to go with that, because monogamous or non-monogamous, it's the same issue. And if we're running on default, we're not having these conversations about what is sacred to me, where is the privacy boundary with me, where is the intimacy with me, what does that mean to you? You know, what happens when one couple, even in monogamous couples, you know, if she has a work husband and they're just talking and his assumption is that monogamy means that she will only share her feelings with him, that couple is going through the exact same struggle that some of my poly couples go through.
Yeah. And I think we don't always think about the emotional intimacy as the same kind of infidelity, really. And so often when I talk with folks about affairs or cheating or infidelity, what I'm looking at is non-consensual intimacy of any kind.
Exactly.
With other people. And so it could be an online exchange that I've never met this person, right? But I've shared the deepest parts of myself with this person. We have all these private jokes. I can't wait to see them. I'm really curious and excited about them. I'm fully present for all of our conversations. That can be so threatening and can violate so much trust without ever even really realizing it. And often those folks will say, well, but I've not even been physical. I've not even talked about sex maybe with this person. But it still can really violate a lot of trust for their partner. You know, I was thinking about that other part, going back to what we were saying about the judging each other's motivation, about you're coming at this from getting emotional needs met as well as physical, and I might be just coming at this around getting physical needs met, makes me think a lot about this. There's a TED talk, no, I think it's on the Oprah Network talk that Brene Brown did that's called The Anatomy of Trust, and she breaks down these 7 pillars.
So good. And it's on your website too.
Yeah, I love it. And specifically, she talks in it, I recommend it to everyone, but she talks about how trust can't be built in an environment filled with judgment. And, you know, I think about that because trust, I have to be able to be vulnerable with, you know, you as my partner and saying this is something I want or I need. That's a really vulnerable thing to do. And if I have fear that you're going to judge that, either because you are judging yourself or you're judging other people, gossiping and telling stories, or you've shared so much judgment about me, there's really not an environment of safety for me to be vulnerable and honest with you. And so I see that as that's such an essential piece when we get into judging each other's motivations for this, or even sometimes our actions or behaviors. And this, and judgment comes up, you know, in the form of contempt and criticism, and also comparison is such a huge part of issues in non-monogamous relationships, but also in monogamous ones, right?
Very true.
Yeah,
I often use ice cream flavors when I'm talking about that comparison-itis. Like by default, if I love chocolate ice cream and I also love peanut butter ice cream, chocolate cannot become peanut butter and peanut butter cannot become chocolate. And I don't need them nor want them to.
Yeah.
And all I need to worry about is being the best goddamn chocolate that I can be. Yeah, it's it's been very helpful to just...
I think about it. For me, the analogy that I use a lot is that I could have two children, and we always like to pretend and tell kids that we love them the same, but we don't love them the same. We love this one because they're funny, and this one because they're reliable, and that one because they giggle at all our jokes, and this one because they're so creative and insightful, and that one because they keep me on my toes, right? Like there's 1,000 different reasons, and I love them differently, but I also love them both completely. Right.
When I work with parents, it's always my go-to too. I think I've been working with kids all day. I'm in kiddo mode. And middle schooling is it's an intense time with kiddos. And so ice creams was where we were at today, but I love that.
That's a good one.
It's very true. I do love both my daughters very differently. And that comparison-itis, ironically, or the judgment of it pops up even with them. One's an extrovert and the other one's an introvert, and just one's judging one for asking for her space. The other one's feeling unloved because she's rejecting of that. So, and here I am, the parent who loves them both equally, is going, oh, I feel for both of you. And this isn't about something you should be taking personally. And this definitely plays out in our love relationships, regardless of how many players are on the board at the time.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that I talk about with my clients also, is that it's really important that I don't have an agenda what sort of relationship structure they ultimately choose. Because the truth is, if it's a healthy relationship, their relationship structure needs to be able to sort of flex and fluctuate as their identities and their needs. And
they will.
Right? So a healthy relationship will flex a little bit. But the other piece is, once you open the box outside of the default and the shoulds, then you get to just tailor it to your own needs. And sometimes that's a little overwhelming to look at, right? Like, okay, well, if it's not this, then what the heck are we doing? Right? Like we can do anything. And so I find it more useful for me to really help folks look at what are their values, what are their dreams and their wants and needs right now. And then, what are the boundaries that help not so much like keep away what we don't want, because I find motivating from a place of fear doesn't fuel anything good. But instead, like, what are the boundaries that help us nourish and cultivate and honor what we really want to grow, what we want more of? That
beautiful
really
time.
Yeah. I mean, that came up for me because in my own personal life, I had to work so hard on really intense jealousy triggers at different parts of my life. And I realized for me, and this metaphor has worked well for many clients, that jealousy was like this raging dragon inside me. And it would be totally reactive and just like burn it all down. When it showed up, it was like totally out of control, burn everything down. And that fits with a lot of the fairy tales about dragons, for sure. Now I know there's a whole dragon thing in Game of Thrones, and I honestly haven't watched that show, so I might but for most fairy tales, when you look at the dragons, they actually are usually like protecting something. They're like golden eggs or special magic coins or a little, there's like a special fairy land or a castle or a princess or something they're protecting. And so I had to learn, and I've helped my clients now shift instead of focusing on all of our energy outward with the dragon and protecting and burning it down and defending. Instead of that, looking at what are we really trying to honor and what is so special to us that it takes this giant fire-breathing dragon to protect. And could we not instead look at building more of that and getting clear about what are the maybe less damaging ways that we could
than burning it all to the ground.
Yeah.
Yes. That is brilliant. I love that. It reminds me of this talk that Tara Brach gives on From Dragons to Schmooze. She talks about how underneath of the dragon is a shmoo, as she calls it. And once you get to know it, it transforms it. So that Rumi poem of like inviting it in, having a cup of tea with your dragon and getting to know the particular nuances of jealousy, like another famous polyamorous counselor, Kathy Labriola, she's got the Jealousy Workbook. She really has this chapter on examining the nuances. What are the particular flavorings of your jealousy? Mm-hmm. And because anyone who's had one of those flare-up moments, if you sat for a hot minute, you'll realize that not every jealous rage is the same.
No.
And, there are many times that I've gone, I did not know that about myself.
Yeah.
Minutes later, right? Once I saw the shmoo underneath of it, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, it's funny. I have intentionally not looked at that workbook because I wrote one myself. And I didn't want to end up
no comparisonitis yet.
Yeah, I didn't want to get into tricky territory with copyrights or anything. But but
once you're done,
I talk about something similar, I think, which is that, and mine kind of came out of reading Eat, Pray, Love. I loved the way that she personified, for her, it was depression and loneliness. Like they were characters that would show up on her doorstep. Yes. And I think about that, like jealousy doesn't travel alone. Jealousy usually is traveling with a whole posse, honestly. Yeah. Like there's like rage, there's maybe bitterness, there's fear, there's insecurity, there's anxiety, there's overwhelm, there's all kinds of other buddies that travel with jealousy, and they each might have individual motivations for paying you a visit. Mm-hmm. But if we're only reacting like you were just saying, like if we don't sit still for a hot sec and interview them a little bit about what are they after, we're not going to be able to address their needs. So I think about it. A friend of mine used to call them the kids in the sandbox. She would say, the kids in my sandbox are acting up.
That's perfect. Yeah. I love internal family systems theory for that type of work, because it's just good to know the people talking in your head, whether it's in the sandbox or in dragon play, whatever, same thing. Yes.
Yep.
Because then it's so much more easily dealt with. And then you can bring it back to your partner and have a very productive solution-focused conversation rather than slinging mud and getting, or sand and getting stuck in contempt.
Yeah, or fire.
Or fire. Or fire, unless it's for good makeup sex afterwards. But still, I don't recommend it on the daily.
Yeah.
Oh, Gina, I could talk for hours on this. I'm just going to have to start a series with you. I'm going to have to
That'd be great.
Schmooze you into come back.
Yeah, what a fun first talk for us.
Oh, I'm so glad you thought so too. Is there a particular way, other than the few hundred things that I'm going to throw into the show notes, that you want people to come hang out with you on?
As far as this topic, I really just am directing people to Uncommon Love PDX, and I feel pretty confident about the folks being able to find workbooks and tools and things on there. Like we were saying, I
definitely
been sending those out. So yeah, I love that
the boss lady for sure. And for the fellow clinicians who are listening, you definitely, this is one listserv you want to be on, because it's value laden. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm about to offer another training for clinicians as well, because so many folks want to serve non-monogamous folks or have clients who are thinking about open relationships, but it's so easy for it to bring up transference for health providers, where our own insecurity or judgment or jealousy or comparison starts to show up about our own relationship history. And so it can be really difficult to support couples without getting caught up in our own stuff. So anyway, I'm going to be offering that again soon. It's always, that is always a rich conversation, let me tell you.
Yeah, I bet. So definitely be on the lookout for that. I was even thinking, like, down here in the Bible Belt, it's been great for my practice. I get everybody's like, I don't know what to do with this. Let's send them over to Tamara. But a lot of the times they're like, I'm just afraid of what other clinicians would say. So I think that's a whole nother conversation, but trainings like yours would be super helpful for clinicians who are considering it, but don't know where to go and are afraid that they're the only ones. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for letting your freak flag fly with me today.
Yeah, likewise. It's been great talking with you.
Thanks for listening to the Sacred Psychology Podcast. I pray you found some inspiration and empowerment to go out and make this life the most fulfilling possible. You can follow Sacred Psychology on Facebook and YouTube. If you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Tag us on social media and let us know what you think as well. Please note that the information provided is not meant to convey professional, psychological, or medical advice. If you could use such services, I highly recommend seeking them out from someone you trust. To get in touch with me personally or to see how we might work together, please check out ariatherapy.com or talesfromatrapezoid.com. Until next time, everyone.